The bonfire lit up the night sky as Laura walked beside Alan toward the human celebration. Her blue scales reflected the orange flames, making her skin appear to shimmer with purple hues. The humans stopped their activities when they noticed her. Some gasped, others stared with wide eyes. A few reached for objects at their sides which Laura recognized as weapons. Everyone Alan called out. This is Laura. She's a Zintari cultural observer. She means no harm. A tall woman with light hair stepped forward. Her face showed caution, but also curiosity. Laura noticed the insignia on her clothing that marked her as a leader. I'm Kate, the settlement coordinator. Welcome to our harvest festival. Laura bowed slightly in the formal Zintari greeting. Thank you for allowing my presence. I have been observing your settlement from a distance, but I did not plan to make contact tonight. Kate raised an eyebrow. We knew someone was watching us. The motion sensors picked up movement. But we could never get a clear reading. Laura felt her scales flush with embarrassment. I apologize for the intrusion. My mission is to learn about human culture beyond official diplomatic channels. The tension in the group began to ease. A young human child approached, staring up at Laura with fascination. You're so pretty in blue, the child said. The simple comment broke the remaining ice. Several humans laughed. The music which had stopped at her arrival resumed. Someone offered Laura a cup of sweet-smelling liquid as the night progressed. Laura found herself surrounded by humans who asked questions about her world, her biology, her customs. She answered truthfully, following the principles of cultural exchange. But she did not mention the strange reaction she had experienced when touching. She needed to understand it better herself before sharing that information. Alan remained close to her throughout the evening, occasionally explaining human customs or translating colloquial expressions she didn't understand. Each time he came, near her scales brightened slightly, a reaction she struggled to control. Later, as the celebration wound down, Kate approached them again. You're welcome to stay in our visitor quarters, she told Laura. We have a protocol for unexpected diplomatic guests. Laura hesitated. She should return to her observation post. She should report this contact to her superiors, but the thought of leaving filled her with an unfamiliar emotion. Was it disappointment? I can show her the way, Alan offered. I'm heading that direction. Anyway, Kate gave him a look that Laura couldn't interpret but nodded. Make sure our guest has everything she needs, as they walked away from the celebration grounds. Alan led Laura through the settlement. The buildings were simple but functional. The environment reminded her of the training simulations she had studied before her mission. But experiencing it directly was different. There were smells, sounds, textures that no simulation could capture. The visitor quarters are here, Alan said, stopping before a small structure. They're basic but comfortable. Laura looked at the building, then back at Alan. I should inform you that physical contact with humans appears to trigger an unusual physiological response in me. I believe it warrants further study. Alan's expression changed. His pupils dilated slightly and his heart rate increased, reactions Laura could detect with her enhanced senses. What kind of study did you have in mind? He asked, his voice quieter than before. For science, Laura replied, unaware of the human connotations of her request. Would you be willing to engage in controlled contact experiments? I need to determine if the reaction is specific to you or common to all humans. Alan smiled. That sounds interesting. Let's go inside and talk about it. The visitor quarters contained a common area with seating and a separate sleeping chamber. Laura examined the space with interest, noting the differences between human and Zintari design preferences. Shall we begin the experiment? She asked, turning to face Alan. He seemed amused by her directness. Sure, what do you want me to do? First, I will record baseline readings. Laura activated the biometric monitor embedded in her forearm. Then I would like to repeat our initial contact. Hand to hand, Alan extended his hand palm up. Laura hesitated briefly, then placed her lower right hand against his. The reaction was immediate. Her scales brightened, her secondary heart began beating rapidly, and a pleasant warmth spread through her. Body fascinating, she murmured. The response is consistent with the first exposure. This suggests it is not merely surprise at the novel experience. Is it happening again? Alan asked, watching her scales change color. Yes, Laura withdrew her hand to take readings. My body is producing elevated levels of several hormones, including our equivalent of what you call dopamine and oxytocin. These are reward chemicals in Zintari physiology. Alan nodded. Those are the same chemicals humans produce when we experience pleasure or form bonds. Laura repeated the word thoughtfully. In Zintari culture, physical contact is reserved for those with deep connections. Family mates, lifelong friends. So touching me is like Alan began, then stopped. Perhaps we should try different types of contact. For the experiment, Laura agreed. Let us proceed systematically. They tested various forms of contact: hand to arm, hand to shoulder, arm to arm. With each touch, the reaction remained consistent, though it intensified. When the contact lasted longer or involved more sensitive areas, after an hour of experiments, Laura had gathered significant data. The reaction appeared to be strongest with Alan, but she needed more subjects to determine if it was universal or specific. Should test with other humans, she said, reviewing her readings. Alan's expression changed slightly. You could ask some of the others tomorrow. I'm sure Kate would approve it as a cultural exchange. Laura detected a shift in his vocal patterns. Was he upset by her suggestion? I value your assistance, she said, feeling a strange need to reassure him. You have been an excellent first subject. His expression brightened. You know, this is all very interesting to me too. We've had Zintari diplomats visit Earth, but they always seem so formal, so reserved. I never imagined your people could be so expressive. Laura hadn't considered how her reactions might appear to him. Zintari control their emotional displays carefully, especially in official contexts, she explained. We believe it shows respect and maturity. Alan moved closer so the color changes in your scales. That's emotional. Yes, Laura admitted. The brighter the blue, the more intense the emotion. It is considered very personal among my people too. Allow others to see such displays as intimate. Intimate, Alan repeated softly. His heart rate increased again. I'm honored. Then. Something shifted in the atmosphere between them. Laura felt drawn to move closer to examine the fine details of his face, the subtle variations in his skin tone, the way light reflected in his eyes. The science of it all suddenly seemed less important than the experience itself. In my eye, she asked, raising her hand toward his face. Alan nodded. Laura gently touched his cheek. The warmth was immediate, but different, somehow deeper, more meaningful. Her scales brightened to a shade of blue she had never experienced before, a color reserved for the most profound moments in a Zintari's life. My research indicates that humans also form connections through physical contact, she said, her voice barely audible. We do. Alan confirmed. His hand came up to cover hers, holding it against his face. Laura's scientific objectivity was slipping away, replaced by something more primal, more essential. She understood now why her people limited physical contact. The sensations were overwhelming, powerful enough to override rational thought. I should stop, she whispered. But I don't want to. Alan stepped closer. His other hand came to rest lightly. On her waist, you're making discoveries, right? Isn't that what scientists do? Yes, Laura agreed. But I'm not sure I can remain objective. Maybe you don't need to be, Alan suggested. Some things are better experienced than analyzed. Laura knew he was right. The connection forming between them transcended scientific curiosity. It was becoming something her people had no word for. Something new, something potentially wonderful and dangerous. If my superiors discover this unauthorized contact, then we'll... Be careful, Alan said. Laura realized she had a choice. Continue as the detached observer she had been trained to be, or explore this new territory with all its unknown risks and rewards. Tomorrow she would need to decide how to proceed with her mission, how to balance her duty to her people with this new understanding of humans and herself. But tonight, in this small room with this human, who had already changed everything she knew about interspecies relations, Laura chose discovery over protocol and, as Alan's fingers intertwined with hers, she understood that some knowledge could only be gained by surrendering to experience. Morning light filtered through the simple curtains of the visitor quarters. Laura had not slept. Her species required less rest than humans, and her mind had been too active processing the events of the previous night and the strange new feelings. They had awakened. Alan had left hours ago, returning to his own dwelling after their experiments had concluded. But the memory of his touch lingered like a phantom sensation on her scales. She activated her communication device. A holographic screen appeared before her. She needed to report to her superior. But what would she say? How could she explain these developments without revealing the depth of her protocol violations? Laura composed a carefully worded message. She mentioned making contact. With the human settlement presenting it as an unavoidable development, she described being invited to observe their celebration, framing it as a valuable research opportunity. She noted physiological responses to the human environment, but kept the details vague. She requested permission to continue direct observation. She sent the message knowing it would take at least one planetary rotation to receive a response. That gave her time to gather more data and decide how much to reveal about her discoveries. Soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Laura opened it to find Kate, the settlement coordinator, standing outside. "Good morning," Kate said. "I hope you found the accommodations satisfactory." "The quarters are most adequate," Laura replied, formally. Kate nodded. "I've come to invite you to breakfast and to discuss your presence here more officially. We should establish some parameters for your stay." Laura followed Kate through the settlement, observing how different it looked in daylight. Humans moved purposefully between buildings carrying tools or supplies. Children played in a designated area, their high voices carrying across the compound. The settlement was larger than Laura had realized from her distant observation posts. The main hall was filled with humans eating their morning meal. Conversations paused briefly as Laura entered, but resumed with only curious glances in her direction. Kate led her to a table where several humans sat, including Alan. His face brightened when he saw her, causing that now familiar flutter in her secondary heart. "Joining us for breakfast?" Kate asked, gesturing to an empty seat. Laura nodded, taking the seat beside Alan. "I do not require nutrition at this time, but I would like to observe your morning rituals." A human across the table laughed. "You talk just like those Zintari diplomats on the news feeds." Laura tilted her head, studying the speaker. Her research indicated that humans often used humor in social situations. "I am uncertain how else I should speak," she replied. The humans laughed again. Alan leaned closer. "Our friend means that you're very formal," he explained. "Most humans are more casual, especially at breakfast." Laura considered this. "I will attempt to adapt my communication style." Kate placed a plate of food before her. "These are pancakes, a traditional breakfast food. Many humans enjoy them with syrup." She pointed to a container of dark liquid. Laura examined the offering with interest. While her species could consume some human foods, they derived little nutritional benefit. However, cultural exchange included participating in food rituals. She carefully cut a small piece and tasted it. The sweetness was intense, but not unpleasant. The texture was interesting. "It's good," she said, mimicking the simpler speech patterns she had observed. Alan smiled beside her. "Good job," he said quietly enough that only she could hear. The conversation flowed around her. Humans discussed their daily tasks, weather patterns, upcoming projects. Laura listened carefully, noting how their interactions differed from formal diplomatic exchanges. She had studied. These humans spoke freely, interrupted each other, made jokes, shared personal information. They touched casually, hands brushing arms, shoulders bumping. Each small contact made her wonder if they experienced anything like the sensations that overwhelmed her. After the meal, Kate led Laura and Alan to a small office. "I need to ask you some questions." Kate said, her tone more serious. "Now, your presence here isn't officially sanctioned, is it?" Laura hesitated, considering her response. "I am an authorized cultural observer, but my direct contact with your settlement was not planned." Kate nodded. "I thought so. We need to establish some ground rules then. Our community has autonomy, but we still report to Earth Central Command. They'll want to know why we have an unauthorized Zentari visitor, Alan spoke up. She's not a threat. Kate, she's a scientist like me. She just wants to learn. Kate gave him a measured look. You've become friendly quite quickly. Laura noticed the implication in Kate's tone. She did not seem to disapprove, merely to observe. I have been conducting research on human physiological responses. She explained. I discovered that human touch triggers unexpected reactions in Zentari biology. Alan has been assisting with these experiments. Kate's eyebrows rose. Really? She looked between them, then back to Laura. What kind of reactions? Laura demonstrated by extending her hand to Alan. He understood immediately, taking her hand in his. Her scales brightened visibly, changing from pale blue to vibrant sapphire. Her breathing pattern altered, and her inner membranes fluttered. Kate watched with fascination. That's remarkable, she said. Does this happen with all humans? I have not yet determined that. Laura admitted. I have only tested with Alan. A smile played at the corners of Kate's mouth. I see. Well, in the interest of science, perhaps you should expand your research. Alan cleared his throat, looking slightly uncomfortable. I would like to conduct additional tests, Laura agreed. But I am concerned about diplomatic complications. My superiors may not approve of such intimate research. Kate considered this. Your people and ours have been maintaining formal diplomatic relations for years, but we know very little about each other, really. This kind of discovery could be important for both our species. Laura felt relief that Kate understood the potential significance if humans triggered biological responses in Zentari. It could explain many things, including why her people had been so cautious in their dealings with humans. Their diplomatic protocols specifically limited physical contact. I propose a compromise, Kate continued. You can stay here as our guest and continue your research. I'll inform Earth Central that we have a Zentari cultural attaché visiting unofficially that should satisfy the bureaucrats. If your superiors approve your continued presence, we can formalize things later. Laura considered the offer. It would allow her to continue her observations and experiments while waiting for official direction. It would also allow her more time with Alan, a prospect that her rational mind identified as potentially compromising, but that another part of her found deeply appealing. I accept your proposal, she said. Thank you for your understanding. Kate smiled. Good. Alan can show you around today. Make you familiar with the settlement, if anyone asks. You're here as part of a cultural exchange program, Alan. She fixed him with a pointed look. Remember, she's still our guest and a representative of her government. Alan nodded. I'll be the perfect tour guide. After Kate left them, Alan turned to Laura with excitement. Want to see the rest of the place? Laura nodded. She was curious about the human settlement, but more importantly, she wanted to continue her experiments. The reaction to Alan's touch was growing stronger, not weaker with repeated exposure. This contradicted standard xenobiological expectations. They walked through the settlement, Alan pointing out various facilities. The small medical center, the hydroponics gardens where they grew supplemental foods, the water reclamation system, the communications array. Humans nodded or waved as they passed. Some looked curious, but none seemed frightened by her presence. This contrasted sharply with the cautious, formal interactions she had observed in official diplomatic settings. This is the science lab, Alan said finally, leading her into a building at the edge of the settlement. My workplace. The lab was small but well equipped. Laura recognized some of the devices, others were clearly of human design, unfamiliar to her. I thought maybe you'd like to use our equipment for your research, Alan suggested, since you're studying biological responses. Laura looked at him with surprise. This is very generous. Alan shrugged. It's just science, right? We're both researchers. We should help each other. Laura began examining the equipment. I could conduct more precise measurements here, she acknowledged. But I am uncertain if I should share all my findings with humans. Alan moved closer to her. Why not? Laura considered how to explain the reaction I experience. It is similar to something my people consider very private. Alan said, his face coloring slightly. The elevated hormones, yes. Laura confirmed. Among Zintari, such responses are associated with pair bonding. Alan repeated. Like, marriage, not. Precisely, Laura explained. Zintari form connections based on biological compatibility and intellectual resonance. We do not have the ritual you call marriage, but we do form lifelong partnerships. When we find someone who triggers certain responses, realization dawned on Alan's face. So when I touch you, it's like... It is not exactly the same, Laura said quickly. We are different species, but there are similarities. That is what makes this discovery so significant. My people have always believed such connections could only form between compatible. Zintari. Alan was silent for a moment, processing this information. Would you like to try an experiment with the equipment here? He asked, finally. Laura agreed. They spent the next hours setting up sensors attaching monitoring devices to Laura's body. Alan was careful, precise, his scientific nature overcoming any awkwardness about their discoveries. 3 days passed while Laura waited for a response from her superiors. Each day she spent in the human settlement, learning more about their ways. Each night, she recorded detailed observations in her personal log, carefully documenting everything, except the true nature of her growing connection to Al-Anon. The 4th morning, Laura's communication device chimed, indicating an incoming message. Her superior commander, Telax, appeared as a stern holographic image, his scales the formal gray of official. Business observer Laura. He began, his tone making it clear he was displeased. Your direct contact with the human settlement violates observation protocols. You were instructed to maintain distance. I determined that closer observation would yield valuable data, Laura replied, keeping her voice steady. Telax's scales darkened, showing his disapproval. The High Council has reviewed your situation. They are concerned about diplomatic complications. However, they also recognize a potential opportunity. You are instructed to formalize your presence with the human authorities. Present yourself as a cultural liaison. Your primary mission remains gathering information about human behaviors and customs. Laura felt relief, mixed with concern. The council was allowing her to stay, but they clearly had no knowledge of her experiments with Alan or the remarkable discoveries she had made about interspecies physiological responses. I understand, Commander, she said. Is there anything specific the council wishes me to investigate? Telax's image flickered. The humans have been expanding their settlements rapidly. Their technology advances at unexpected rates. We need better understanding of their social structures, their decision-making processes, their motivations. And Laura, his scales shifted to a warning shade. We have reports of unusual biological responses in some Zintari who have had prolonged contact with humans. The Council believes there may be unknown effects from proximity to their species. Be vigilant. For any symptoms, Laura struggled to keep her scales from betraying her reaction. They knew something about the effects humans had on Zintari biology, had been observed by others, though perhaps not understood. I will report any unusual experiences. Commander, she said carefully. See that you do. Telax responded. The transmission ended, leaving Laura alone with her thoughts. She had been granted permission to stay, but now faced a difficult choice. Should she report her discoveries about human touch and the profound physiological responses it triggered in her? Or should she keep that knowledge private, at least until she understood it better? A knock at her door interrupted her deliberation. Alan stood outside, a hopeful expression on his face. Kate wants to see us, he said. She has news in Kate's office. Laura explained the communication from her superiors. I have been authorized to remain as a cultural liaison. She concluded. Kate nodded. That works perfectly. Earth Central has approved your presence. They're actually quite excited about having a Zintari living among humans outside the diplomatic corps. They see it as a step toward better relations between our species. And the research, Alan asked, looking between them. What about our findings? Kate's expression grew more serious. That's more complicated, she said. Earth Central would be very interested in what you've discovered, but I'm concerned about how they might use that information. Laura tilted her head, uncertain of Kate's meaning. Kate sighed. There are elements in our government who view everything through a strategic lens. If they learn that human touch affects Zintari biology, they might see it as a potential advantage in negotiations. Or worse, Alan frowned. You think they'd weaponize? I think Kate replied that any discovery about how one species affects another will be evaluated for all possible applications. That's just the reality of interspecies relations. Laura understood the concern her own government would likely have, similar reactions. If either side viewed this biological response as a vulnerability, it could damage the fragile trust between their species. What do you suggest? She asked. Kate considered for a moment. Continue your research, but keep it between the three of us for now. Document everything, but secure your findings. We need to understand what's happening before either of our governments tries to exploit it. Laura agreed, though she felt uncomfortable concealing information from her superiors. It contradicted her training and duty. But she also recognized the wisdom in Kate's caution. Later, as they walked from Kate's office, Alan seemed troubled. What are you thinking about? Laura asked. He stopped, turning to face her. I'm wondering what this means. For us. Laura repeated the phrase, her scales shifting to a questioning hue. Alan gestured between them. This, whatever is happening. It's not just research anymore, is it? Laura couldn't deny the truth in his words. The scientific curiosity that had initially driven her had evolved into something more personal, more profound. The physiological responses were real and measurable, but the emotional connection forming between them transcended biology. No, she admitted. It is not just research. What happens when your research concludes? Alan asked. When you have all your data. What then? Laura hadn't considered the future beyond her immediate mission. Before meeting Alan, her life had been clearly defined by duty and protocol. Now those certainties were shifting like sand beneath her feet. I don't know, she answered honestly. Alan moved closer to her. I keep thinking about what you said, about how Zintari form pair bonds based on biological compatibility. It makes me wonder if there could ever be. His words trailed off, but Laura understood the unspoken question. Could there ever be such a bond between different species, between a human and a Zintari, between him and her? The possibility both thrilled and terrified her. Such a thing was unprecedented. In her people's history, it would challenge everything both their species believed about interspecies relations. Come with me, she said suddenly. Let us continue our research. There are still many questions to answer. In the privacy of the laboratory, they connected Laura to the monitoring equipment again. The sensors mapped her biological responses as Alan touched her hand, her arm, her face. Each contact sent cascades of data across the screens confirming what they already knew. The response was growing stronger, more complex with each interaction. But today, Laura wanted to test something new. I wish to monitor your responses as well. She told Alan. He seemed surprised, but agreed. Laura carefully attached sensors to his skin, following the instructions. In the human medical database, the equipment was designed for human physiology, but the principles were similar enough for her to interpret the readings. When she touched him, the monitors registered immediate changes. Elevated heart rate, increased hormonal activity, changes in brain function patterns that indicated pleasure and emotional engagement. You respond to my touch as well, she observed. Alan smiled. Was that ever in doubt? Among my people? Laura explained, contact creates responses primarily. In those who are biologically compatible for bonding, we had assumed humans were simply different, that your touch affected us, but ours would not affect you. But it does, Alan said quietly. Yes. Laura confirmed, studying the readings. It appears there is a reciprocal effect. Not identical to what I experience, but similar in many ways. The data suggests a form of neurochemical synchronization between us. What does that mean exactly? Alan asked. Laura considered her answer, choosing her words carefully. Among Zintari, such synchronization is the foundation of pair bonding. It allows mates to sense each other's emotional states, to form deep mental connections over time. Alan's heart rate increased further, showing on the monitors. So you're saying We're forming some kind of alien bond. Not precisely, Laura cautioned. We are different species. The process cannot be identical, but there are similarities that suggest compatible elements in our neurochemistry. It is remarkable, unexpected, and unprecedented. As far as I know, Alan disconnected himself from the monitors and took her hands in his. Looking directly into her silver eyes, he asked, "Does it frighten you?" Laura considered the question. Her training had taught her to maintain emotional distance, to observe, not participate, to gather data, not become the subject of study. Yet here she was breaking every protocol, discovering feelings and connections she had never imagined possible. Yes, she admitted, but not in a way that makes me want to stop. Alan's smile was warm, tinged with relief. Me too, he said. Their research continued through the afternoon, taking measurements, testing different types of contact, documenting the results. But the clinical nature of their work was increasingly at odds with the emotional undercurrents flowing between them. As evening approached, they finally set aside the equipment. Laura stored the data in a secure file accessible only with her biometric signature. "There's a community gathering tonight," Alan said as they prepared to leave the lab. "Would you like to attend?" Laura agreed. She had participated in several community events during her stay, each one revealing more about human social structures and customs. Tonight was a musical performance. Several settlers, playing instruments and singing as they sat among the humans listening to the music. Laura observed how the sounds affected the audience. Human music was different from Zintari harmonics. It followed patterns she found both strange and compelling. The emotions it evoked seemed universal, crossing the boundaries between their species. When Alan's hand found hers in the darkness, she didn't need monitors to measure her response. She could feel her scales brightening, feel her secondary heart accelerating, feel the pleasant warmth spreading through her body. 2 weeks had passed since Laura's arrival at the human settlement. Each day brought new discoveries, not just about humans, but about herself and the unexpected connection forming between her and Alan. Their research continued, documenting the increasingly complex biological responses their contact triggered. But the scientific framework was becoming a thin disguise for something far more personal. Laura had been sending carefully edited reports to her superiors, sharing observations about human social structures, work patterns, and cultural practices while omitting any mention of her experiments with Alan. She knew this selective reporting violated her duty, but she also understood the potential consequences of revealing too much too soon. This morning, however, everything changed. Laura was in the laboratory with Alan when her communication device signaled an emergency transmission. The holographic image that appeared was not Commander Telax, but Ambassador Vorin, the highest-ranking Zintari diplomat assigned to Earth observer Laura. The ambassador began his scales the formal gray of official business. "We have received concerning reports from Earth Central about your activities." Laura felt her scales pale with alarm. "What reports, Ambassador? You were authorized to serve as a cultural liaison," Ambassador Vorin continued. "However, we have learned that you are conducting unauthorized biological research with the human." Alan Foster. Laura glanced at Alan, who had gone very still beside her. "How had they discovered this? Who had reported their work, Ambassador?" "I can explain," she began. The ambassador's scales darkened. "The High Council is deeply troubled by this development. Interspecies biological research must follow established protocols with proper oversight. You have potentially compromised diplomatic relations with the humans. Your actions could be interpreted as unauthorized experimentation on another sentient species." Laura straightened her posture. "My research is consensual, Ambassador. Alan Foster is a scientist who has participated willingly. Our findings could be significant for future relations between our species." The holographic image flickered as the ambassador shifted position. "You are to cease all research immediately and prepare for extraction. A diplomatic vessel will arrive within 3 planetary rotations to retrieve you. The Council will determine how to proceed after reviewing your complete findings." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving Laura and Alan in stunned silence. "They know," Alan said finally. "How could they know?" Laura's mind raced through possibilities. "Someone must have observed us. Perhaps during our tests, perhaps Kate reported our activities to Earth Central, who then informed my government. Alan shook his head. Kate wouldn't do that. She understands the importance of keeping this private until we understand it better. Then who? Laura asked. Alan frowned. The settlement has security systems, cameras monitoring critical areas, including the lab. I didn't think it never occurred to me that anyone would be watching our research. Laura felt a cold dread settling in her secondary heart system. If Earth Central had been monitoring them, they likely had recordings of all their experiments, all their discoveries, all their growing intimacy. 3 days, she said quietly. 3 days until they come for me. Alan moved closer, taking her hands in his. We need to talk to Kate. We need to understand exactly what happened and what it means. Kate was in an emergency meeting. When they arrived at her office, several settlement officials were gathered around a communication terminal. Speaking with a representative from Earth Central, the holographic figure projected above the terminal wore the uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps. We understand your concern, Coordinator Burton, the figure was saying. But the decision has been made. The Zintari government has requested the return of their observer, and we have agreed to facilitate the transfer. But Kate protested she hasn't done anything wrong. The research was consensual and potentially groundbreaking. The diplomatic official's expression hardened. The Zintari consider this a serious breach of protocol. They view it as unauthorized experimentation, regardless of consent. We cannot risk damaging relations over one incident. The official noticed Laura and Alan standing in the doorway. Ah, he said. The subjects in question. Kate turned, seeing them for the first time. Come in, she said, her voice tight with frustration. The official regarded Laura with undisguised curiosity. So you're the Zintari who's been studying human biological responses. Fascinating work from what I've seen in the reports. Seen the reports, Laura repeated. Who showed you our research data? The official smiled. Thinly standard monitoring protocols. Observer Laura. All research conducted in frontier settlements is subject to review, especially when it involves interspecies interactions. Alan stepped forward. You've been spying on us. Not spying, the official corrected. Monitoring. Ensuring safety and compliance with interspecies protocols. Your research facility contains standard security systems. As a scientist, you should be aware of that. Kate interrupted. Before anyone says something they'll regret, let's be clear about what's happening. The Zintari government has requested Laura's return and Earth Central has agreed. That's the situation we're facing now. Yes, the official confirmed. A Zintari diplomatic vessel will arrive in 3 days. Observer. Laura is expected to prepare for departure and turn over all research data to both governments for review. Laura felt trapped. The implications were enormous. If both governments obtained their complete findings, they would see not just the biological data, but the evolution of her relationship with Alan. They would recognize the pair bonding symptoms, the emotional attachment, the potential for something unprecedented between their species, and then what would they forbid further contact? View it as a threat to established diplomatic relations. Classify it as a security concern. I request private consultation with Coordinator Burton, Laura said formally. The official frowned, but Kate quickly agreed. We'll continue this discussion later, she told the hologram, ending the transmission before he could object. When they were alone, Kate looked at Laura and Alan with concern. I'm sorry, she said. They contacted me this morning. Earth Central has been monitoring all research activities in the settlement, including yours. They became concerned when they detected unusual biological patterns in both of you. So they informed my government. Laura concluded. Kate nodded. They're calling it a diplomatic courtesy. Sharing information about a potential biological issue involving a Zintari national. Alan paced the small office. This is ridiculous. They're treating our research like some kind of violation when it could be the most important discovery in interspecies relations. Kate's expression was sympathetic. I agree. But both governments are viewing this through their own filters. Earth Central sees potential strategic implications. The Zintari appear to see it as a protocol violation. Neither seems to appreciate the personal dimension. The personal dimension, Laura repeated, softly. The phrase seemed inadequate to describe what had developed between her and Alan. Kate looked at her directly. Laura, I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. Is what's happening between you and Alan simply a research interest? Or is it something more? Laura felt her scales shift to the deep blue of emotional truth. Among my people, this color is only displayed during moments of profound significance, she explained. It is the color of life, bonding of emotional and physiological connection at the deepest level. My contact with Alan triggers this response consistently and with increasing intensity. And what does that mean? Kate asked gently. It means, Laura said that by Zintari standards, Alan and I are forming a pair bond, something my people believe possible only between compatible Zintari. It has never been documented between species. Kate turned to Alan. And you? Alan's voice was steady, his feelings clear. I don't need color-changing scales to know what I feel. This isn't just research for me. It hasn't been for a while. Kate was silent for a moment, processing this information. So we're not just dealing with an interesting biological phenomenon. We're dealing with what amounts to an interspecies relationship. Yes, Laura acknowledged. The first of its kind, as far as I know. Kate leaned back in her chair. This complicates things. Both governments are treating this as a scientific or diplomatic issue, but it's becoming a matter of personal freedom. The right of two sentient beings from different species to form a connection. What can we do? Alan asked. There are only 3 days before they take Laura back. Kate considered the question. Earth Central has jurisdiction over this settlement, but they respect our autonomy in most matters. They would need a compelling reason to forcibly remove someone, especially if that person requested asylum. Asylum, Laura repeated the unfamiliar term. Political protection, Kate explained. If you formally requested to remain here based on personal choice, rather than diplomatic assignment, it would create a different legal situation. One Earth Central might hesitate to override, but my government, Laura began, would be unhappy. Kate acknowledged. But they would have to navigate formal channels to compel your return. It would buy us time. Time to properly document your findings. Time to make both governments understand the significance of what's happening. Laura felt torn between duty and desire, between her lifelong commitment to her people and the unexpected bond that had formed with Alan. If she requested asylum, she would be rejecting her training, her mission, her world. But if she returned as ordered, she would be separated from Alan. Perhaps permanently. I need time to consider this, she said. Finally, the 3 days passed too quickly. Laura spent every moment either with Alan continuing their research or alone in deep meditation, seeking clarity about her decision. The Zintari practice of meditative reflection had always guided her in times of uncertainty. But this situation had no precedent, no guidelines to follow. On the final evening before the diplomatic vessel was scheduled to arrive, Laura sat in the laboratory reviewing their collected data. The evidence was undeniable. The physiological bond forming between her and Alan was real, measurable, and growing stronger. It showed patterns similar to Zintari pair, bonding but with unique characteristics reflecting their different biologies. The door opened and Kate entered, her expression serious. We've received confirmation. The Zintari vessel will arrive tomorrow at midday, she said. They're sending an official delegation including Commander Tellax and a medical specialist. Laura felt her scales pale slightly. They are treating this as a medical emergency. Kate nodded. They've requested that all your research data be prepared for transfer. And Laura, she hesitated. They've specifically ordered that you have no further physical contact with Alan until you've been examined by their specialist. The restriction felt like a physical pain to Laura. They fear contamination, she realized, or addiction. Perhaps both. Have you made your decision? Kate asked gently. Laura looked at the data screens showing the intricate patterns of her connection. To Alan, I've been reviewing our findings, she said. There is something here, something important. Neither of our governments fully understands the significance. Kate sat beside her. I agree. But governments rarely appreciate discoveries that challenge their established views. They prefer knowledge they can control, predict use for their own purposes. Laura knew this was true of both human and Zentari authorities. They would see the bond forming between her and Alan as a potential threat or tool, depending on their perspective. Not as the miracle it truly was. I cannot allow them to study this connection as merely a scientific curiosity, she said, or worse, as a potential tactical advantage. There is something sacred here, something that deserves protection. Kate's expression softened. You've decided then? Yes, Laura said. I will request asylum. I will remain here with Alan, but we must secure our research. The complete data must remain private, at least until we fully understand it ourselves. Kate nodded. I've already prepared the asylum documentation, and I've spoken with Earth Central. They're not happy, but they recognize the potential diplomatic significance of your choice. They won't prevent it as long as you make the request formally, and publicly, and my government. Laura asked will be angry. Kate acknowledged. They may attempt to challenge your decision through diplomatic channels. They may claim you've been influenced or compromised, but legally, they cannot force your return against your will. Not without creating a major diplomatic incident. Laura absorbed this information. The path ahead would not be easy, but she had faced the alternatives. The thought of returning to her world without Alan, of severing their growing bond, was unbearable. The physical separation alone would cause her pain, but the emotional loss would be devastating. There is one more thing, Kate added. We've detected unusual communication patterns. The Zentari vessel arriving tomorrow. It's not a standard diplomatic transport. It's a medical research ship. Laura felt alarm ripple through her scales. A medical research ship. That suggested her government viewed the situation more seriously than she had realized. They may intend more than simply retrieving me, she said. Kate's expression confirmed her fears. We think they plan to study what's happening between you and Alan in depth. They may see it as a potential biological threat or vulnerability. Laura understood the implications. Her people were methodical, thorough. They would want to understand every aspect of this unexpected bond, to document it, analyze it, perhaps even find ways to prevent it in the future. Does Alan know? She asked. Kate shook her head. Not yet. I wanted to speak with you first. Laura stood. I must find him. We must complete our preparations tonight. As she hurried through the settlement searching for Alan, Laura felt a new urgency. Time was running short. She found him in the community garden, sitting alone among the mixed foliage from different worlds. Alan, she called. He turned, his face lighting up at the sight of her, but his smile faded when he saw her expression. What's wrong? She explained what Kate had told her about the arriving vessel, the medical research ship, the restriction against contact, the implications. They're treating this like some kind of disease, Alan said, anger evident in his voice, or a security threat. Laura agreed. My people are cautious by nature. They fear what they don't understand. And this bond between us is unprecedented. Alan took her hand, ignoring the restriction that hadn't yet formally begun. So you've decided? Yes, Laura said. I will stay, but we must act quickly. We need to secure our research data tonight. Before they arrive, Alan squeezed her hand, the now familiar warmth spreading through her scales. I've been working on something, he said. Come with me. He led her back to the laboratory, where he showed her a small data crystal. I copied all our findings, he explained, compressed and encrypted. It contains everything, every measurement, every observation, our complete documentation of what's happening between us. Laura examined the crystal with surprise. This goes against your government's instructions. Alan smiled slightly. Some things are more important than following orders. This isn't just about us anymore, Laura. This is about proving that different species can connect on the deepest levels, that the barriers between us aren't as fixed as everyone believes. If we let them take this research, they'll classify it, control it, maybe even suppress it. Laura understood the data crystal represented not just their personal journey, but a potential revolution in interspecies relations. The first documented case of a bond forming across the biological divide. We should duplicate it. She suggested one copy for safekeeping. one to share with Kate. She has supported us. She deserves to know the truth. Alan agreed. They worked together to create a second crystal. Then Laura recorded a final entry explaining her decision to remain with the human settlement as an asylum seeker, her formal rejection of the extraction order, her request that her government respect her choice. As midnight approached, they sat together in the quiet laboratory, the settlement, around them sleeping, the stars visible through the observation window. Tomorrow everything changes. Alan said. Laura nodded. Tomorrow I choose a new path. A path with you. Alan turned to face her. I've been thinking about what this means for us. Beyond the biology, beyond the science. What happens next? Laura considered the question. I do not know precisely, she admitted. My people have no protocol for this situation, but the bond we are forming. It is similar to what leads to lifelong partnerships among Centauri. Alan took both her hands in his. Among humans, when two people form a deep connection, when they choose to build a future together, they often create a formal partnership marriage. Laura said, recalling the term from her cultural studies. Alan nodded. It's more than just a ceremony, it's a public declaration of commitment, a statement that two lives are now intertwined. Laura felt her scales shift to that deep, meaningful blue that had become so familiar in Alan's presence. Among my people we have a similar concept, the joining of life paths, the formal recognition of a biological and spiritual connection. They sat in silence for a moment, both understanding the magnitude of what they were considering. Not just asylum, not just continuing research, but a formal union between species. Something neither world had witnessed before. Is it possible? Alan asked. Finally, Laura met his eyes. Nothing about our connection was thought possible, she said. Yet here we are. Morning came too soon. Laura and Alan had remained together through the night, finalizing their preparations, securing their research, ensuring that whatever happened today, a record of their discoveries would survive. Kate met them as the sun rose. The Centauri vessel has entered orbit, she reported. They'll land within hours. Are you ready? Laura nodded. I have prepared my formal request for asylum, and I've notified Earth Central. Kate said, they've agreed to recognize your request, though they're not happy about it. The diplomatic implications are complex. The settlement gradually awakened around them, people going about their morning routines, casting curious glances toward Laura. Many had heard rumors about the arriving Centauri delegation, about the unusual situation developing in their community. Midday approached. Laura, Alan, and Kate waited at the designated landing area, a flat expanse at the edge of the settlement. The communication system alerted them when the Centauri vessel entered the atmosphere. It descended with precision, the sleek silver craft unlike the bulkier human ships. Landing with barely a sound, the vessel was smaller than a diplomatic transport, but larger than a standard shuttle. Its design clearly indicating its specialized medical research function. A hatch opened. A ramp extended and Commander Telax emerged, followed by several Centauri officials, including one wearing the distinctive garments of a medical specialist. Laura stepped forward to meet them, her posture formal, her scales deliberately maintained, at a neutral shade despite the emotions churning within her. Commander Telax, she greeted him with the traditional gesture of respect. Observer Laura. He returned the gesture, though his scales showed clear disapproval. We have come to retrieve you and all research data related to your assignment. The High Council awaits your return.